let's get this show on the road. We're already a couple minutes late, and based on the military training that I've had, which you can still see the remnants of in my haircut, and I apologize for it, we're going to get this thing started so at some point we can make our way, if anyone's interested, out to the patio thereafter and have a cigar with the whiskey that we're walking through in this tasting tonight. What this is going to be is an instructed tasting, teaching you guys how to drink whiskey in a way that's going to be enjoyable. Because a lot of people, and I don't mean to condescend, but the reality is a lot of people drink whiskey incorrectly, and all spirits, they drink it incorrectly. And so you get that wince, right? You get that sense that it's really unpleasant. There are times when you want to do that, right? When you're trying to mainline tequila in your body, because that's how you turn the night up, you're doing it right. But when you want to make whiskey more of an experience, one that celebrates where it comes from, and the fact that it is one of the most sacred agricultural products, and this particular whiskey, a sacred agricultural product from our community, you want to pay it the respect that it deserves. So the first thing I want to say, the second thing I want to say, is thank you very much for supporting us. By buying a ticket this evening, you guys are supporting 2 local businesses. And I'm going to recognize the proprietors in just a second. But we're about to talk about New Scotland Spirits. It is a whiskey company that we founded 6 years ago. 6 years ago now, with whiskey that is 5 years old. But what we're really selling is an idea, something that is becoming increasingly extinct in the society, and that is the concept of a neighborhood. So, to drive this point home, to put a finer point on it, we have here in the audience tonight my 6th grade teacher, Mrs. Fierro. So, thank you, Mrs. Fierro, for stopping by. You get to see the fruits of your labor. We also have, and this guy is actually really important to me because he's very much of a like mindset for what we're trying to do in building a business community that respects the culture of New Scotland, and that is our man, Mr. Schufelt, of the New Scotland Business District. He is the director of the New Scotland Business District, and so I'd like everyone to give a hand to that. That's making sure our business community reflects our values. And then obviously we got a lot of friends here tonight from Underwood. Thank you so much for stopping by, and we're going to end up kind of calling some people out. Because if you haven't, like, for example, heard my latest podcast with this individual right here, you're wrong. And Ron, if you could give links afterwards in case they haven't heard enough of me by the end of the evening. The important thing, before we get started here, is just to emphasize what it is that we're selling to New Scotland. And it is a concept of being here tonight, right? We're New Scots. And for the interlopers who are coming down from Albany, we're still in your county. And this idea of a place where you can go and know the people, whether it's life, whether it's moving into a community, that is kind of what we're trying to package here. I'm not trying to just put together a New York whiskey. I'm trying to put together a New Scotland spirit, a spirit of New Scotland. It wouldn't work if we called it Slingerland's whiskey. But the idea of New Scotland, this kind of sense of leading into the name of our town, a reference to a historical sensibility, that's what we're trying to put on all the labels. We're going to talk about that in a little bit. So, without further ado, what's going to happen this evening is the members of my team are going to assist in pouring out our whiskey as we go through our instructed tasting. And so if I could have Steve, Noah, and Greg come up here, you guys are going to be among the first guinea pigs this evening. Hello. And as part of our swag offerings, which you can get $25 in the purchase of a bottle, the first thing that we're going to introduce you to as part of our product suite is our branded knife. Because we want to make sure that if you're going to drink our whiskey, you've done it right. And that's why you have to be sober to open the bottle. All right? By the time you finish, you can be toasted. Until that time, you're going to need this to open that bottle, which pays homage, I believe is the word, to Tuttletown's Hudson Whiskey. Before it was bought by a corporate conglomerate, they had this beautiful wax seal signature. and these little apothecary bottles. And what they would say, if anyone's familiar with Hudson whiskey, what they would evoke is this sense of a time long gone of when whiskey was this thing that you finished off the evening with, tiny little nib. That's what we're trying to do. In the shape of our bottles, which you can see right here, we're trying to get that old-timey feel. And we hand wax it. Every single bottle that you're looking at, in addition to having our little signature on it, right, our handwriting saying what year it was bottled, etc., etc., every single one was hand dipped by the people that you're seeing here tonight. So Noah, Steve, Greg, Rebecca, me. What we do is we source our grain from New Scotland, because that to us is what's important about it. We source our grain from New Scotland, and then we bring it to distilleries all over the region. Albany Distilling Company, Schenectady Distilling Company, Upstate Distilling, Stoutridge, the artist formerly known as Capital Distillery. What we tried to do was hack the system and say what was important to us was our hometown, was the soil, the grains that come from the fields in which we grew up. So we source that soil, those grains, and then we bring them to our partners who have invested all this money, have all this overhead, and we escape those commitments. We don't pay rent on a facility. What we do is try to support these other proprietors, these other owners of distilleries, to craft what to us is that important thing, right? A piece of our home that you can take with us. Now, I also should say, because I'm just looking out at the pours that everyone's getting, you will not hurt my feelings if you do not drink everything that you pour tonight. In fact, I'm going to strongly advise you to not drink everything you are pouring. Okay? And I say that like that is just ridiculous. That is, Albert, that is not to be, that is, most of that's got to go back in the bottle and we just won't say anything to anyone. All right, by just a quick show of hands, who has yet to have some of our winter wheat on their table? Okay, we got a couple tables over here. Oh, just people who don't have their. Has everyone got it? It's all for it? All right, you guys need to slow down. You're being way too efficient. You're supposed to be really milking this.
It's in my training, boss. What do you want?
Hey, I'll tell you what. Why don't you do this? I'm gonna join you. That way I'll know exactly how much we've got here. Do you mind freshening me up, gentlemen? Noah, what am I supposed to do with all this?
Drink it.
Okay, so again, I already promised you, we're not going condescending when I tell you how to drink this whiskey. We've got one last VIP. I'm really sorry, and I have a great place for him to go. My boy Sean, talking about community and how we know people from like the very beginning. I've known this dude since I think he was Pinky Red and I was Fearless Frank Fluoride in first grade. And that's Mrs. Fierro right there, bro. By all means, wherever you'd like, but just know that that one's going to be keeping her eyes on her. All right, so enough of the expending oxygen needlessly. What we're going to do right now is we're going to, for the first time, teach you folks how to drink whiskey in a way that makes it a completely pleasant experience. And it's really simple. All you're going to do is smell it. And the first thing you're going to notice is that there is, with this whiskey, a distinctly sugary taste. Or a scent. You can smell the sugar. You can smell the sweetness. Now the interesting thing about that sweetness, those fumes that give you this sense of kind of a sugary nose, as they say, that's from the barrel. And what you're going to do when you sip this is you're going to prevent the fumes from burning the inside of your trachea. You don't want that alcohol vapor to hit you in the back of the throat. And so what you do with all whiskeys, especially with these higher proof ones we're about to bring out, the first thing you do is sniff it and hold that breath so you've acclimated your taste buds, you've prepared them for what comes next, and you just top of the lips, right at the front of the tongue. You should, in fact, still be able to talk. There's so little. What you'll see when you do it this way is that actually you start like gathering a sense for, oh wow, now I know what those snobs are talking about when they say, I've got these distinct notes of caramel. I know you've heard that before, and I know you've restrained the impulse to punch those people in the face. But that is in fact what happens when you take a moment to actually enjoy this taste. And this taste, for what it's worth, comes from two different sources. The first is the terroir of New Scotland, because this is a 100% wheat whiskey. We are, as far as I know, this year, one of only 4 liquor companies, distilling concerns in all of the state that have released 100% wheat whiskey. And that's because it's a difficult grain to work with in its unvarnished 100% capacity when you're distilling. And so you're getting a taste of Lime Kiln Farm. And I'm not going to put the Millers on blast yet. We've got plenty of time to talk about you. But this comes from Clip Road, up in New Scotland. And so that's the first thing you're getting, that kind of the aroma and the taste that you associate with wheat. It's a simpler grain, it's a softer, less complex flavor, to be honest. The other thing you're getting, vastly more importantly, is the barrel. What we do with our barrels, this is what's called a char-free barrel. We took a barrel, sourced from Adirondack Cooperage, an amazing cooperage in the state, and we took their barrels that are burned on the inside. It's called charring. They burn the white oak of the barrel. And in so doing, they caramelize the starches by burning that organic matter. Something, 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 yada, 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 science. Sorry, Mrs. Fierro. It becomes sugar. All right? Those starches caramelize, you've got sugar in the barrel, and that is what is extracted from the barrel over the course of the 5 years that this was aging. Okay? So you got this whiskey. And a lot of people will say that whiskey, very least bourbon, has as its most, let's say its most authentic or genuine expression is going to be barrels that come from Kentucky. And that is wrong. In fact, upstate New York, a little bit further north, that belt, on whatever latitude line we are, the reality is that we have uncompromising seasons. It's really hot, it's really cold. And when the barrel undergoes all of those seasonal differences, it interacts with the spirit in ways that you don't get in more temperate climates, right? It's pulling the alcohol into the fibers of the wood and then pushing it back out as it expands throughout the season. That is why, I mean, like, I have the utmost confidence that what you just tasted is as good as anything that you've ever tasted before. You are not going to go home to your snobby little liquor cabinets and find something that is better than this. You might have a specific grain type that you like, but you're not going to find a wheat whiskey that is better than this. No joke there. That's just the reality, and you tasted it for yourselves. So I'm going to take one more little sip, and before we move on to the next spirit in our tasting, if I could rely on you gentlemen one more time to open some bourbon and start putting, you don't have to get cocky about it. You've already anticipated where I'm going. You just say Roger. Now, that's a little army humor for you. I want to say something also, like, don't get me wrong. I had a great time in the military. It was a cult. And in those final 5 years of my confinement in the cult, that's when I said, okay, well, wait a second. What are we going to do with these 5 years? Like, clearly my eyes are on the next chapter. And what are we going to do with that? And the first thing that I did was contact my boy Pat Carey. All right, Pat Carey, I knew, brewed beer in his bathtub. That is true. All right? And I said, hey man, this is, kind of interesting. I know, I've heard, I didn't even know where whiskey came from. I didn't even know that it came from cereal grains. I did not know that whiskey came from corn, or wheat, or rye, or barley. All I knew is that it took time to make it, and I had time. So I reached out to Pat Carey, and Pat Carey and I started saying, all right, well, what is it that we're going to do with this time? We must know people back home who could get us grains. Apparently that's what's required. And so we made 2 calls. The first call was to my boy Brendan Shields, who I've known since kindergarten. And Brendan Shields was friends with the proprietors of Indian Ladder Farms. And he made a couple calls, and next thing you know, we've got as much barley as we could have from the 2017 harvest. The second call I made was to someone who has become the absolute vertebrae of the entire operation, and that was Rebecca Miller, who had married into the Miller clan with offspring that are now in their 5th generation of working those fields. And it was a very interesting conversation, because for me, going up the street to Limekiln Farm and sourcing grain from Limekiln Farm meant that I was going to be taking grain that came from the exact streets, or excuse me, the fields rather, that we passed en route to school every day on the school bus. So Randy Miller, who hates these type of public gatherings, Randy is working the fields with his brother Albert, and these guys I met on the bus on the way to school, not knowing that one day we would be looking at their fields, their acreage as the lifeblood for the company. So that was in 2017, and that's kind of how we started this. And the idea started at that point growing a little bit. Okay, look, what are we going to do? How are we going to do it? We started sourcing grain. We started working with our distilling partners, and then we just kind of waited. Kept bringing in new, each year new grain, distilling it, holding those barrels. We had a brief detour on the wrong end of a lawsuit from the Kingdom of Scotland and the Scottish Whiskey Association, which very much did not approve of our linguistically obvious deduction that if a whiskey from Scotland is Scotch, then a whiskey from New Scotland is New Scotch. They weren't cool with that. And 2 years later, when they finally realized that I had literally nothing better to do than defend your freedom, and as an attorney for the Army, I was just responding to motions and asking for delays, etc., we finally came to an agreement. So we're not New Scotch, we're New Scotland Spirits, which I think is obviously a much better presentation of what we are. Who here, does everyone have their second spirit, their bourbon? No. Who does not have it?
Jesse, question?
Sure.
What are we? Any particular reason you use that? It's like in baking that's used for like crusts, crusty roll, crusty bread, because it's got higher protein and gluten and that kind of thing. Is there any reason that's used for this?
What you've picked up on is, I'm going to detail the way this company works. I say, hey, you know what would be cool? And then the Miller family, the actual farmers who know the grain, they say, Jesse, that's the dumbest thing I've ever heard. And then about a week later, they come back with what actually the answer is. So for example, I can't answer that as to why we use that specific grain, strain of wheat. But what I know is that the Miller clan does, and the number of things I said, we need to do this, we need to do that, it's about 5%. What you're drinking here is about 5% of what I wanted to do, and they told me no. It's kind of, let me introduce you to what you have on your tables. So the first thing is that each of these bags, this is the grain. If you didn't know, do you mind everybody? If you didn't know where whiskey came from, and I didn't, and I'm not even kidding, like I did not know that whiskey came from grain as opposed to any other substance. It just never really occurred to me. So this right here, this is wheat. That's wheat. Apparently not. Yeah. What you're looking at here, this is not bought at the store. This was cultivated by the Miller family on their sprawling farms, now in their 5th generation of operation. All right, which I think is a really crucial piece that I'm going to return to when we wrap all this up. The other thing that you're getting right now are a couple, just to orient us to what it is that we're looking at. When we talk about whiskey, it's just a rhetorical device, all right? When we call it bourbon whiskey, when we call it rye whiskey, wheat whiskey, those terms come from the law. Similarly, the term Scotch whiskey comes from the law. It's codified in the Code of Federal Regulations. And you guys can pass these papers around. It gives you an idea of what each type of whiskey is. So, for example, we're about to try this bourbon. All right, this bourbon means that in terms of the grain mash, it's 51% corn or more. That's all it means. There's a couple other specifications. You can read them yourselves in the Standards of Identity. But what's also notable is that bourbon just means corn. And the corn lobby, which as we know is among the most powerful concerns on the planet, they also lobbied for the inclusion of a different type of whiskey called corn whiskey. And what corn whiskey means is that in the grain mash, it's got to be at least 80% corn. And then because they wanted to get that corn onto the market as fast as possible, they didn't age it in a barrel. In fact, by law, and you can look at it and read it yourself, I think I put it in blue, that corn whiskey, they say, get it out, put it in a bottle. And that's why you hear a lot of people call corn whiskey moonshine, because it's clear. Moonshine, really moonshine is just alcohol made from anything, literally a leather boot. Moonshine, all right? Corn whiskey, what's cool about corn whiskey, and if you look at these little cards, we're giving you a preview of an event that's going to happen right here at the Northern Barrel Brewing Company. Our 68 whiskey brand is a corn whiskey. It hasn't been aged, which means that when you get flavor from it, you're just getting the grain. The difference between a corn whiskey and a vodka is that a vodka takes out anything that is remotely resembling a taste profile from the grain, all right? Because it's distilled at such a high proof. Corn whiskey, they lower that proof. And when I'm talking about proof in distilling, look at that other piece of paper that we gave you that talks about the process. The way that alcohol is extracted from a fermented mash of grain when you eat it, because, once again, science, it has a lower boiling point than does water. The alcohol comes out first. Okay? It heats, vaporizes, it's in the still, and when it cools, it returns back to a liquid state, and it becomes, well, kind of this. What this has, and what we're about to taste right now, is the influence of 5 years worth of aging in a char 4 barrel. This is a wheated bourbon, just like Maker's Mark, but not intolerable. Imagine if Maker's Mark didn't make you reach for the Coca-Cola. Yeah. Right? That's what it could be. That's what at one point it was, until they decided to, mass produce it. We're about to taste this. This is a 100 proof whiskey. Everything else that we put out is 82 proof. 82 because that's the division in which I served, 82nd Airborne Division, and the year that Pat and I were born, and essentially most of us in the company. Is that these guys? The rest of us are 82 babies. And with a bonded bourbon, like this one, you up the alcohol considerably. So it's still a wheated bourbon. It still means that the secondary grain is wheat. This happens to be a mix of at least 51% corn. For us, it's about 55%. Then we do about 15% barley, and the rest is wheat. This wheated bourbon is also what's known as a bonded bourbon. A bourbon bottled in bond. And what a bonded bourbon means, and you'll read it on the back of our label, is that it has very specific and exacting standards for the production of the whiskey. It derives from the 1897 Bottled and Bond Act, which was the first of America's consumer protection laws. Because prior to Prohibition, the government did get alcohol right. And in 1897, they passed the Bottled and Bond Act, which said that in order to make sure we knew what it was that we were drinking, since people were going blind, not kidding, they were going blind by drinking alcohol that had been treated with turpentine and isopropyl alcohol to give it that extra kick. That's why people were going blind. That's why they were dying. What they decided to do was create a spirit that had certain indicia of reliability, most notably that it was distilled by a single distiller, at a single distillery, in a single season, and it was aged for a minimum of 4 years under lock and key by federal agents. The federal agents part, they've kind of taken a little bit of a backseat on that. As far as I can tell, it's a little more honor system. But it's still a bonded bourbon because we did age this for, even though the first batch erroneously said 4 years, it is a 5-year aged bourbon. And we're going to do that same thing that we tried before. You're going to sniff it, and you'll notice it does similarly, very much because of the barrel and that wheat. It's got that sweet scent, you can tell. Hold your breath. Put a little bit on the front of your tongue. You can feel the kick. That's what 50% alcohol will do to you. A lot of people call that mouthfeel. You'll hear people say that, oh, this is good mouthfeel. And it is, because what's happening is, unlike with an 82 proof whiskey, this is vapor that's volatilizing in your mouth. Now, if you were to just shoot this, that's not pleasant. And that's not how you're supposed to do it. You're also burning your esophageal lining. That was needless. I did not think it would be theatrical. That was so hard to watch. All right, well, you guys got the gist, right? No reason to do that. And it's an unpleasant experience. But take that same spirit and just one more time, you sniff it, a tiny little bit on the front of your lips, a tiny little bit on the front of your tongue. There is not a bonded bourbon out there that is going to be smoother than this. When you invest the time in letting your spirit age and mellow in those barrels, and you move your barrels around, what you get is a spirit that's going to take you, this right here with these aggressive pours, this should take you 15 to 25 minutes to consume. All right? That's how long it should take. Now, you guys might be saying, what was the thought process of coming to market with whiskey right about the time that cannabis becomes legal? And I'll still tell you that at the end of the day, as long as you're responsible about the activities in which you engage after drinking our spirits, this is still, in my view, a slightly more manageable interaction with an intoxicating substance. If you do it correctly, this can be something that serves as a social lubricant. Okay? All right. At this point, I'm going to bring a couple other people's names up here, just because I think this is important. So, Chuck and Michelle, the proprietors of Northern Barrel Brewing, one of the things they did when they looked at Voorheesville is they saw this kind of dearth of this exact experience right here. There was no longer a place after the closure of Smitty's and what was about to become my epic battle with Stewart's if they had kept pressing. They looked at this community and they said, where is there a place where we can break bread together? And they've been a bit of an anchor of sorts. There's a lot of other places that are going to be coming into this community. And it is on all of us to ensure that a rising tide lifts all boats. One of the things that we are really committed to doing with New Scotland Spirits is ensuring that what we can preserve here is the agrarian traditions of this community. We want family farms here, in part because it does power our business, but also because it says something about our community. So, Chuck and Michelle, I'm going to ask that we all put some hands together for these folks. Because these really are, this is the best expression of what I remembered about growing up here and why I wanted to come back. Okay? It is also on all of us, and one of the reasons, I already mentioned it, one of the reasons that I've been working hand in glove with Craig on the New Scotland Business District is it matters what type of businesses you bring into your community. Because there is no better expression of your community than the businesses that it welcomes. People vote with their dollars. When I was growing up, I took for granted the fact that we had the best teachers, the best schools, the best little places to hang out, our parks, etc., etc. I have nephews that live in this community now. And I want to make sure that New Scotland Spirits isn't just exporting an idea, that we're not just capitalizing on our brand. We're taking the fact that New Scotland Spirits is the name on our label. That means that, yeah, obviously, everything we put out has to be aged a minimum of 5 years. Unless it's points. That it has to be good. It has to be something that people will be proud of to say comes from their community. But it's also because I'm trying to let people know that New Scotland, in that ethereal sense, that's something that you can have anywhere if you just unplug a little bit. And if you look at the people with whom you went to school back in the day as the source of what could be your colleagues in an entrepreneurial ambition. I had no idea that I would be looking at Randy Miller as what is basically the key to my future. I had no idea that Rebecca Miller, who has now essentially, in being the brains and brawn of Limecombe Farm, is now also essentially our guiding light in New Scotland Spirits. It didn't occur to me that these people that I spent so much time with in detention
That's not well done.
it didn't occur to me that we would one day be looking to our fields and our community for support. And I want to just emphasize this because so many of you guys, like I see at the farmers markets right now, we were not prepared for this. When we came up with our initial projections, we hedged for failure. I mean, that's what we did, right? Like, what happens if no one buys this? How do we liquidate our alcohol and get our money back? What we hadn't planned for, and I hate when people say it's a good problem to have, because it's still a problem nonetheless, we did not anticipate how much you people like alcohol. That was not in the projections, and we are scrambling to figure out how to accommodate that. One of the things that we're doing is, and I'm just going to admit it, we basically said to the Millers, just give us all the grain you possibly can, and we're going to now move into the vodka space so we can get it onto the market as fast as possible. And we're going to start looking at other local distilleries and saying, all right, well, maybe this grain didn't come from Rebecca's fields, but nonetheless, it'll power us until we can take the grain that's soon to come off our fields and do something with it. And in fact, as if I planned for it, one of the reasons that this bottle is so small is that this grain, which comes from Indian Ladder Farms, all of our other bottles come from Limecombe Farms, this is 100% barley. We'll talk about it when we get to it, but this grain is not being grown to Indian Ladder Farms anymore. Barley crops have collapsed. Now, interestingly enough, because there's so few of these bottles, we put them in these smaller ones. There's so little of whiskey, we put them in smaller bottles. We now all have to hope and pray that the barley harvest on the Miller's fields right now is successful. So Randy and Kristen, Randy and Rebecca, if you guys screw this up, nobody gets any single.
It's not Mother Nature, but.
That's right. So if you guys could, on Saturdays and Sundays as applicable, please, toss the big guys some prayers. Prayers for rain, but like not enough rain in the exact amount of humidity. All right, well, without further ado, let's put the rye out. Please, you know what? These guys are so friggin' annoying. We're not even like, don't give them the credit. Okay, I do think here's one thing I will say, and I think this is really cool. One of the reasons that I wanted these guys here today is because, our objective is to turn this company to be a little bit of a reflection of the community that's raising the company. And what I think is cool is that if we can make this work, you're looking at what I would hope would be the next generation of the executive management of this company. And we'll kind of talk about where we're trying to lead the company, but these are the folks that we've brought into the company who've been incredibly critical to the success of getting our things from field into flask. I also will say, in fact, why not? Because the applause is worth it. Greg got his first sale today. It's on you. Okay, so, well, I guess I was, the reason I didn't realize that you guys had your rye already is because someone didn't get his rye. Oddly enough, it's the guy who signs the checks. Thank you. All right, this is a rye whiskey. And I'm going to tell you right now, unless who here has drank a rye whiskey before? Yeah, well, okay, well, a lot of places people have not drank rye as readily. Okay, when you drink a rye whiskey, if you're expecting a bourbon, if you're expecting a wheat whiskey, if you're expecting that sweeter sensibility, you're going to be disappointed. Rye whiskeys are, by definition, spicier. Rebecca says that she prefers to call it more savory, and I think I get where she's coming from. A rye whiskey can be a bunch of different types of whiskey, right? What we do is we make ours what's known as an Empire Rye whiskey. Empire Rye is a movement, and it was started by a bunch of distillers in New York to essentially say that if Kentucky wrongly is going to convince everyone that it's not a bourbon unless it comes from Kentucky, roger that, we're going to put the mark on a rye whiskey as being indicative of New York. Part and parcel to the New York experience. Rye whiskeys are what whiskeys in the colonies began as. Right here in the Hudson Valley. It was a rye whiskey that was being distilled until they moved a little bit further south, a little bit further west, and found a cheaper grain. I'm going to tell you right now that our winter wheat, the thing you started with first, that has been the best seller at the markets. That's what you're going to want to bring a novice whiskey drinker. If you want to make sure that they get hooked on an addicting substance, you give them a wheat whiskey. It's going to be sweet. We've had someone came up to us and said they think it tastes like a liqueur. I think that overstates it a bit. But the point is, it is the sweetest. It's probably the most broadly popular. I think, and forgive this language, but there's like no other term more appropriate for it. I think I drink wheat whiskey when I'm trying to give agency to my inner basic bitch. All right? Like, it's not complex. It's just a little bit more easygoing, right? This is a more complex whiskey. It is my favorite whiskey. And this rye whiskey, I'll admit that there's one on the market that's better than this. The aged 6-year whiskey piggyback, 100% rye. But this would be the second. Aged 5 years, 82 proof, and get the signature on the nose, as they call it. The first thing you're going to notice is that it's a little bit more floral, right? If it's sweet, if you can detect any sweetness, it is almost going to be like a honey, right? Like a honey sweetness. And when you take a sip, because it's a rye, look for those pumpernickel notes, all right? when you taste it, there's kind of a more complex array of how the flavors interact with your taste buds. Now look, some people hate rye. You know, like some people think cilantro tastes like soap. I've often thought, like, when people will take this, and I've watched them, and like, there's no sense of even trying to be polite to me. They'll just be like, oh, that is awful. It's the weirdest thing. Like, I can't imagine walking up to someone's table and being like, yeah, go screw yourself. That's what happens. Some people don't like rye. I don't get it. To me, this has got the start of this kind of honey sweetness that comes from the barrel, and then on the back end, it's got that spiciness, right? To me, that's what makes this a little bit more complex. And I like the fact that it is a part of a movement that says, if it's a minimum 75% New York rye in the grain bill, and you put it in a barrel at no more than 115 proof, to give it a little bit more flavor, if it's a fully New York product, this is going to be called an Empire Rye. And I will just share with you folks, when you go out to, out of state and you're looking for spirits, often, and I don't know if you can maybe, I think generally speaking, if something is calling itself an Empire Rye, it's going to be a really good rye. And you guys will suggest that you know what we're talking about. When you order a specific Empire Rye from the menu, it means it's from New York. It means it is a New York product. And you'll see that obviously bourbon has just, we've so fetishized bourbon. In 1964, a bunch of very savvy, I disparage them by calling them post-Confederates, got the Congress to declare bourbon America's native spirit. They really outplayed us. So that's why what you guys need to do is order your Empire Rye, and eventually, if we have anything to say about it, and if the Millers and their relationship with God is sufficiently strong that we get rain when we need, hopefully the Empire Rye you'll be celebrating will be some of this. Next year, wait for our 6-year aged 100% rye that we're using to take on those premiums. All right? So as we approach the end of our tasting experience with our single malt, all right, this was our flagship. Right? It was going to be our flagship, and then barley collapsed, and hopefully Rebecca is going to make this work. What we're going to talk about is the future. And for this, I just want to give a quick shout out to, and I hate to put him on the spot,
Finger will make it better.
but everyone needs to join me in asking that Brian Kafka leave the Department of Taxation and Finance and join us full time. Because Brian Kafka, whom I've known since, 20 years, 25 years or whatnot, former buddy on the wrestling team, managed to graduate high school at about 119 pounds, and then in one of the most stereotypical examples of post-adolescent compensation became the 290-pound behemoth right there. Kafka is also instrumental in joining Rebecca and me and Pat Carey, who's on the West Coast, and John Berquist, my friend since Serendipity Nursery School, who's also one of the investors, and Chris Monty, my buddy from the 82nd Airborne Division, and Brian McGregor, who's an honorary New Scot by virtue of the fact that he has given agency to all these frescoes that you see on the front of our bottles. What we're trying to do is build a company that gives people a taste of what we've taken for granted as being from a community like this.
I'll be right back.
The first thing that we're going to do is use our technique of sourcing aged whiskey to hold us over until our grains can come online after having aged for 5 years in barrels. And during that time, while we're raising finances to source that inventory, we also want to build a distillery. And one of the things that's interesting is that, God loved the zoning board here because they've kept us what we are, and I can't thank them enough. But I need them also to make a gigantic exception this one time to industrial grade development in a distillery that we can utilize to still maintain our commitment to single barrel and single batch production, where every single whiskey that we put out, this right here, this is coming from one of 4 different barrels. And if you like it, you better buy up the stock, because you're never going to get the same taste. Every batch has its own flavor signatures. And every barrel further influences it in a way that is very distinct to that barrel. And so what we want to do is, in expanding our marketing footprint, the first step is to make sure that we're entrenched in the hill towns. That's why, if any of you have watched the way Facebook pumps you with messaging and advertising directly into your brain, like, yeah, we paid for some of that. It was to tell you that I really want, more than anything, you folks here tonight, if you're going to buy our bottles, please do it at Northern Barrel Brewing. Please do it at Helderberg Mountain Brewing Company. Please do it at Indian Ladder Farms. We are right now in 18 other stores, and we're expanding those stores every day. But if you folks are here in New Scotland, I ask that you support the New Scotland retailers who make this possible, because they have supported us in ways that we hadn't anticipated. And we really want to make a collective of those people that are going to lean in to what it means to be a hometown community. I guess we're ready to start this last one. But I might as well read this, all right? In part because we've got a couple Albanites here. I mean, technically we're all Albanites for the county, but what I really like about this is this view, adapted a little bit of artistic license. But if you look at the view on our single malt bottle, you'll see what, for me, kind of defined my experience growing up. And that was from the top of, our hill. I know you've been there before.
Yes, sir.
Or up at Thatcher Park. You can look down into the valley and you can see the Empire State Plaza. And at our Empire State Plaza Farmers Market, it's cool to see the Albany skyline reflected in the very place that, for whatever reason, so captivated my imagination when I was a kid. That's our strategy right now. We want to get entrenched in the hill towns. We want to be entrenched in New Scotland. That is our path to the authenticity that says that if New Scots, our Hilltown folks, people in Guilderland and Bethlehem, they're claiming this as their own, and they're doing so in ways that I just can't even, I'm just so incredibly flattered and appreciative. Once we're there, once you can go into any bar, restaurant, or retailer in the Hilltowns, in New Scotland, and you can see this as essentially your birthright, once we've established that authenticity, then we're going to take the city by storm. Then from Albany, when we've established a foothold there, that's when we're going to spin out across the state, first going down the Hudson River, westward along the Erie Canal, and after that, what I'd like to do is, upon establishing our footprint in New York as one of the only genuine New York retailers coming out of this area, genuine as being a sourcing of the grain from this area, because it has our terroir in it, it has our spirit, it's the spirit of our spirits. Then we'll start looking at, in my view, other agricultural communities nationwide, and those whiskey lounges in the metropolitan area. I don't need this to be the thing that you flavor your aspartame Coca-Cola with. All right, that's not the point. This is the thing that I want you to reach for when you are with friends, when you are with family. So I'm just going to read this one. This was our first. You'll see that, I'm classically pedantic on all of our labels. But this one, to give people a presence, or a sense of presence, this is our Helderberg single malt whiskey. It says, the Helderberg's in your hands. Known as the jewel of Albany County, the town of New Scotland is nestled at the base of the Helderberg Mountains in the very heart of upstate New York. And from its rolling fields and historic family farms comes the barley which gives this New World whiskey its distinctive rustic flavor. Helderberg single malt whiskey is the culmination of a lifelong friendship between two new Scots who aim to harness the essence of their rural hometown and sip of its tranquil spirit. Recalling old world recipes but grown, malted, and distilled entirely in New York State, this whiskey packs the countryside aroma familiar to any new Scot and enjoyed by all who celebrate a great American spirit. So drink to old friendships for old time's sake and enjoy this New York whiskey. Nostalgia in a bottle, a good time in a glass. So, if we're ready for our final tasting, before we move into the mixed drink component, I just want to point out that was when we were essentially a two-person outfit. Before our company ballooned into a 6-member LLC composed of people that I've known my whole life, allying with Limekiln Farm that essentially is going to be running the entire agricultural ops as we move into this next phase. And what you're going to get with this single malt whiskey is an American's interpretation of a Scotch. And how we do that, in the popular consciousness, a Scotch is smoky, right? You've tried it and you're like, oh wow, it tastes like I'm licking an ashtray. Some people don't like it. With other people, they need it. What we did is instead of using heat to heat the grains before they go in that mash, which is what gives all of these Scotches that distinctive smoky flavor, we kind of cheat. We burn the ever-loving daylights out of the inside of that barrel, heavy char-for, and when we age it for 4 years, in this case 5 years, what you get is a spirit that extracts that smoke from the char. So this isn't smoke from the grains. It's not packed in with that peat. What it is a smoky sense that you get from the barrel, and by, as we talked about earlier, caramelizing all those starches with the white oak, you're going to get a sweeter finish. Because it's also, in addition of pulling out all of the char, all of the smoke, it's also pulling out some of those sugars. So this is going to be a little bit different. It's a single malt. It's 100% barley. Okay? But let's give this a try. Smell it. Distinctly different aroma, right? Now wet your lips with it, in front of your tongue. This one's going to be an acquired taste. I'll tell you right now, it's not my favorite. Who said that? That's exactly right. And the interesting thing is, I will tell you, it's not what I would go to, but it is the one that I'm most proud of. Jesse, what did she say? It's like a mezcal, and I can't explain why. I know exactly what she's talking about. Isn't that weird? And what I'll say about it is we had a Scot from like legit Scotland who came to Rebecca's table at the Empire State Plaza after having bought a single bottle before, and he bought a case and said, this is what it should taste like, I'm bringing it back to Scotland. Interestingly enough, he's one of 2 reasons why we had to institute a 1 bottle per person limit, when we also found that someone near and dear to the company was trying to corner the market on our single malts. And so this is the only one where, for obvious reasons, we do kind of have to put a limit on it, just because we want everyone to get, their birthright. Anyone who's from New Scotland, we at least want you to be able to taste this. So what we're going to do at this point is, and in fact, Chuck, logistically, in terms of what I'm thinking is, what you guys can do, there are 3 different spirits that you can use for a mixed drink. You still have an ungodly amount of spirit on your table. So by all means, go back and forth, taste what you have. And see what you like. See what's intriguing to you. And what you're going to do is then order one of these spirits. All right? The Boulevardier which was a spirit introduced to me by Daniela, who's joining us here from Brazil. Thank you, Daniela. She introduced us to the Boulevardier, and I'm going to tell you right now, this one, like if there's ever a time to like give agency to your inner basic bitch, this is the time to do it, because this is fantastic. And that uses the winter wheat. It's going to be a much sweeter, it's like a genteel. The next one is the old new fashioned. All right? And the old new fashioned, when you hear something being called an old fashioned, the reason why it's called an old fashioned is because it's supposed to use rye. It's rye, okay? It's the original spirit. When people make an old fashioned with bourbon, it's like when people use the word literally in its figurative sense. It's the most annoying thing. So we call it the old new fashioned because it's got New Scotland spirits in it, our Helderberg whiskey. And so you can try our rye-based mixed cocktail. Okay? Or there's the New Scots sour. And this is going to use our bonded bourbon. And for those of you who have made the appropriate arrangements for a designated driver, that's your mixed cocktail. So I'm gonna assist in kind of getting some of this stuff out to you folks.
All right.
But I'm gonna ask that everyone pick the spirit of their choice. I guess I'm gonna stick with the single malt. But pick the spirit of your choice because I'm going to ask that you join me in a toast. In a final toast to reflect the fact that you folks have all come out here to support either me or to support Rebecca. Obviously, in getting Dylan Longton here, we went to the very best in the cinematography in town. Oh my God. Gracie, I didn't even see you. Welcome. So, I'm going to ask you guys to join me in a quick little toast. With family and friends, from now to the end, cheers to Old New Scotland.